Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 28 of Upadēśa Undiyār, but which is a continuation of the idea in the previous two verses. In verse 26, Bhagavan said, he explained what is meant by knowing oneself. Being oneself alone is knowing oneself, because oneself is devoid of two. That is, our real nature is awareness. Awareness doesn't need to do anything to know itself. Merely by being itself, it is knowing itself. So to know ourselves as we actually are, all we have to do is to be as we actually are. So being is itself knowing, which is related to what he said earlier in verse 23, in which he said, Uludu unara unubu berin mayin, uludu unavahum. Because of the non-existence of any other awareness, that's any awareness other than what exists, to be aware of what exists is awareness. Awareness alone exists as we. So here, the term Bhagavan uses for what exists here is uludu. Uludu is what is called a participial noun. It's formed of an adjectival participle or a relative participle, ulla, and du, which is the second person ending, as in adu or idu. So ulladu means that what is. It also is, that is the third person singular participial nouns, often used in the sense of a gerund, a being. So it can mean being, it also means what is. So here Bhagavan is asserting the oneness of being and awareness. That is, what actually exists is only awareness. So there's no existence independent of awareness. And awareness is, the very nature of awareness is existence, being. So being and awareness are one and the same. So that is why in verse 26, he says, being oneself is knowing oneself. Then in verse 27, he talks more about the nature of knowing. And he says, he uses two words, arivu and ariyame. Arivu means knowledge. Ariyame means ignorance. So we can translate this verse literally. Arivu ariyameyam atra arive arivahum. Only knowledge that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is knowledge. But it's perhaps, here knowledge is used in the sense of awareness or knowing. So we can also translate it as only knowing that is devoid of knowing and not knowing is knowing. That means that only that is the real knowing. Idu unme, this is real. Arivadaku ondrile, there's nothing for knowing. There's nothing to be known. There's nothing to know, because what is only one. So it's not a case of that is when Bhagavan said that. But the real knowing is devoid of knowing and not knowing, or knowledge and ignorance. What is the knowledge and ignorance is devoid of is knowledge and ignorance of anything other than itself. So in that state of pure awareness, where we are aware of ourselves as we actually are by being what we actually are, there is no knowledge of anything else. And since there's no knowledge of anything else, there's no ignorance of anything else, because nothing else actually exists. So other things seem to exist only when we know them. When we, in the state that is beyond knowing, it's also beyond not knowing, because there's nothing to either to know or not to know in that state. There is just being. So verse 28 is a continuation of this same idea. What Bhagavan says in the first line of this verse is, taṇādu il yādu terihil hiṟpiṉ. That means if one knows what the nature of oneself is, here the first word of this verse, taṇādu, is a poetic elongation of taṇādu. The pronoun tan means oneself. It's inflected form, the inflectional base of all the other forms of tan. The inflectional base is tan. So taṇādu means of oneself or one's own. Taṇādu is simply for poetic reasons that second vowel is elongated. So taṇādu here means taṇādu. Iyal is nature. Yādu is what? Ena means thus. Terihil. If one knows, tan means tan is oneself. If oneself knows what is the nature of oneself, we can take it that way, or simply if one knows what the nature of oneself is, hiṟpiṉ, then what? That is what he says in the next two lines. Aṇādi aṉanta sat undīpaṛa, akhaṇḍa cidāṉanda undīpaṛa. Undīpaṛa, as I've explained earlier, it is not, we are not give any meaning to it here. It's for poetic reasons. That it does have a meaning, but it's more conveying the spirit in which the teachings are given, the joyful, playful way in which Bhagavan gave these very deep and profound teachings. So there are two things, aṇādi, or there seem to be two things superficially, aṇādi, yaṉantasat, and akhaṇḍa cidāṉanda. It is for poetic reasons that Bhagavan has split it up like that. Actually here, there are three adjectives and three nouns. The three nouns are sat-cit-ānanda, that is sat in the first half and cidāṉanda in the second half of this second line. So that sat-cit-ānanda, though these are three nouns, but they are not referring to three different things. They are three ways of describing the same thing. Sat is being, chit is awareness, aṇanda is happiness. As Bhagavan implied in verse 23 that I referred to just now, sat and chit are one. That is, being and awareness are one. Pure being and pure awareness are one and the same thing. It's just two ways of describing the same thing. And the nature of that sat-chit, that pure being awareness or existence awareness, is pure happiness. So sat-cit-ānanda. And then there are three adjectives. The three adjectives are, the first one is aṇādi. Aṇādi means without beginning, beginningless. This implies not only beginning, I mean, the obvious meaning is beginning in time. It also could apply to beginning in place. For example, we talk about the source of a river. We can refer to it as the beginning of the river. So things can begin in time and they begin in space. But sat-cit-ānanda has no beginning. Why does it have no beginning? Because it is the one reality it ever exists. As Bhagavan often used to say, what exists at one time and not at another time doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. So sat-cit-ānanda is what always exists. It's the only thing that always exists, because it neither comes into existence, so it has no beginning, and nor does it cease to exist, so it has no end. This is a very important principle to understand. This is something that Bhagavan has taught us in, it's something that Krishna taught in the Gītā, and Bhagavan translated that is in the Gītā chapter 2, verse 16, which Bhagavan translated into Tamil as verse 9 of Bhagavad Gītā Saram. Those of you who know Sanskrit may well be familiar with the Sanskrit version, but I will here talk about the Tamil version, Bhagavan's own Tamil version. What he says is, ilad tanaku iripu ile. There is no existence for what does not exist. Ulladanaku ilame embadu ile. There is, for what does exist, there is not what is called non-existence. So what he's saying in these two sentences, for what does exist, for what does not exist, there is no existence. That implies that what does not exist never exists. And for what does exist, there is not what is called non-existent. In other words, what does exist never ceases to exist. It is never non-existent. This is an extremely deep and important principle in Advaita metaphysics. Then the rest of the verse, he says, Enave illadu ulladu ennum irendin ilbu idutan kanda. Therefore, those who have seen that this is the nature of the two called illadu, what does not exist, and ulladu, what exists, meitane arinda tava, are ascetics who have known the reality. So if we know the reality, we will know that what actually exists always exists, and what does not always exist doesn't actually exist at all. So this is why Bhagavan often said, what exists at one time and not at another time doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. So all phenomena, they seem to exist. Any phenomenon, take any phenomenon, it doesn't always exist. It exists sometimes and not at other times. Even all phenomena are objects. So all objects don't actually exist. They merely seem to exist because they don't always exist. Even the subject, for one who is aware of object, for one to whom all objects appear, namely ego, is itself non-existent. Why? Because it exists sometimes and not at other times, or rather it seems to exist sometimes and not at other times. In waking and dream, we seem to be this ego, but in sleep, there is no ego. So ego is unreal, and everything that appears to ego is unreal. So subject and all objects are unreal. What actually exists is only, what is it that exists in all three states? Waking, dream, and sleep is only our fundamental awareness of our own existence, that sat-cit, what we are aware of as I am. That is alone is what always exists. So that alone is real. So this is a very, very important principle. It's also expressed slightly differently by Gaudapada in Mandukya Karika. And this is one of the verses in Mandukya Karika that is so important that he actually repeated it twice. It comes in the second chapter as verse 6, and in the final chapter as verse 31, I think. Yes, 31. What he says in this verse is, that which is non-existent at the beginning and in the end is necessarily so, implying it's necessarily non-existent in the middle. Like this is almost exactly what Bhagavan used to say, but in slightly different ways. Bhagavan used to say, what exists at one time and not at another time doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. So the same implication is here. That which is non-existent at the beginning and in the end, in other words, that which has a prior non-existent and a subsequent non-existent is actually non-existent even when it seems to exist. But it's expressed in the same idea in a slightly different way. And then that's the first line. And in the second line, he says, objects, that's everything that is seen, or everything that is perceived, are like the illusions we see. Still, they are regarded as if real. That is, though neither ego nor phenomena, neither subject nor object, nor any objects actually exist, they seem to exist. And because they seem to exist, we take them to be real. But actually, what exists must always exist. There's a very deep reason for this. But also, actually, though it's a very deep reason, it's also a very simple reason. We can understand this using an analogy. That is, existence is not a property. Existence is something that is too fundamental to be a property, but in certain respects, it's analogous to a property. So if we consider a property like heat, fire is intrinsically hot. You cannot have fire that is not hot. Whenever there is fire, it is hot. So fire is an intrinsic property heat is an intrinsic property of fire. But not all things that are hot are intrinsically hot. There are things that are sometimes hot and sometimes cold. For example, if you've got some freshly cooked rice, steaming hot rice, if that rice is served to you, that rice is very hot. But heat isn't an intrinsic property of that rice, because before it wasn't hot, and if you leave it long enough, it'll become cold again. So it is not always hot. It is not intrinsically hot. That is, being hot is just a temporary state for it. It's not an intrinsic property. It's just a contingent or an incidental property. It happens to be hot now, but it's not always hot. So since it is not always hot, it must have borrowed its heat from some other source. So from where does rice borrow its heat? From boiling water. When you put rice in boiling water and leave it there, it becomes hot and it gets cooked. So the rice derived its heat, the hot rice derived its heat from hot water. But just like the rice, the water is not intrinsically hot. Water isn't always hot. Sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold. So heat is not an intrinsic property of water. So it must have borrowed its heat from some other source. It's borrowed its heat from a hot pan. And the hot pan is also not intrinsically hot. Sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold. So it has borrowed its heat from some other source. It borrowed its heat from fire. Fire has not borrowed its heat from anywhere because it's intrinsically hot. So that is, there we're talking about the property heat. As I say, existence is not a property, but it is analogous to explain this idea. We can take it as analogous to a property. So something that it doesn't exist always is not intrinsically existent. So whatever is not so just like something that is not intrinsically hot must have borrowed its heat from something else, something that is not intrinsically existent must borrow its existence from something else. So whatever doesn't exist always must have borrowed its existence from something else. We may ask, but how can something borrow its existence from something else? How can that be possible? That doesn't make any sense. It does, if we think about it. For example, if you think about gold ornaments, for example, the ornaments borrow their existence from gold. That is, without gold, the ornaments don't exist. The gold in a particular form is called an ornament. It's called a necklace or a ring or a bangle or whatever. So it had that bangle has borrowed its existence from gold. In other words, forms always borrow their existence from the substance. But even gold has borrowed its existence from something else. According to modern science, we can say gold has borrowed its existence from atoms consisting from atoms consisting of a certain number of molecules and a certain number of neutrons, protons, and electrons. And those have borrowed their existence from the energy of which they're composed. So in this way, we can see how all forms borrow their existence from the substance of which they're made. So from what do all phenomena derive their existence? They derive their existence only from ego. Why? That is, objects derive their existence from the subject. Why? Because objects seem to exist only in the view of the subject. Without a subject, without ego, the perceiver, there would be nothing perceived, nothing known. So all objects derive their existence from a subject. But the subject is ego, the perceiver. The one who is aware of objects is ego. So ego, we know, doesn't actually exist because it doesn't always exist. So from where does ego borrow its existence? Ego, as Bhagavan explained in, for example, in verse 24 of Uludunapadu, Bhagavan says, the jadu urul ṇaṇādi, the insentient body, does not say I. What does he mean by it does not say I? That's a metaphorical way of saying it's not aware of itself as I. Sat-cit-ānanda, sat-cit, being awareness, doesn't rise. Why doesn't it rise? Because as he says in this verse 28, it's aṉādi. It has no beginning and it has no end. It is ever as it is. So sat-cit doesn't rise. But in between these two, udalava, ṇaṇādu, udikum, iyal. Iyal means in between. In between, one thing, Andrew, I, Nan, udikum, rises, udalava, at the extent of a body. When Bhagavan says it rises in between, what he implies is since this I rises, it cannot be sat-cit, because sat-cit doesn't rise. And since it's aware of itself as I, it cannot be the body, because the body is not aware of itself as I. So he says it rises in between. That what he means by in between, well, there's a lot of implication. He's obviously using the term in between in a metaphorical sense. Just like you cannot find, nothing can be in between a bangle and the gold of which it's made. There can be nothing in between, in a literal sense, there can be nothing in between the body and sat-cit, because sat-cit is the fundamental existence. Without existence, the body couldn't exist. So there cannot be literally anything in between. So what does he mean by in between? It has various implications. One implication of in between is that it borrows the properties of both. Supposing, for example, you read a story in the newspaper and you're not entirely sure whether that story is true or not, because you're not very convinced about it. It doesn't look like it's entirely true. So you ask a friend of yours who's better informed than you. You say, I read this story in the newspaper today. Is this true? And your friend may say to you, it's neither true nor false. It's somewhere in between. When he says it's somewhere in between, what does he mean by somewhere in between? He means it's neither entirely true, nor is it entirely false. It's got elements of truth in it, and it's got elements of falsehood or fiction in it. So it's a mixture of truth and falsehood. Likewise, ego, this one thing I that rises, borrows the properties of both sat-cit and of the body. It is aware of itself as I. That awareness I, the awareness I am, is the property of sat-cit. Sat-cit is always aware of itself as I am. So ego is aware of itself as I am, but that awareness I am doesn't belong to ego. It has borrowed it from sat-cit. It has borrowed both its existence and its awareness from sat-cit. Sat-cit alone is what actually exists and what is actually aware, but ego has borrowed its existence and its awareness from sat-cit. But it rises, so it is not sat-cit, and it rises as the extent of a body. So it's a limited awareness. It's awareness limited to a body, an embodied awareness. That's why he says as the extent of a body. Now we are aware of ourselves as I am this body. Where are our limits? Well, that is the skin of this body is the limit. We are. Whatever is inside this body is me. Whatever is outside this body is something other than me. So we are limited to the extent of a body, both in place, in space, and in time. I was born at such and such a time. One day I'm going to die. So as this person that I seem to be, as this body that I seem to be, this body wasn't existing 100 years ago. and it's not going to be existing 100 years hence. So my extent as this person, this body that I now take myself to be, is limited both in space and in time. So when we rise as ego, we borrow our existence and our awareness from sat-cit, and we borrow our form from the body. But we cannot lay claim to either the existence and awareness, because that belongs to sat-cit, nor to the form of the body, because that belongs to the body. So this is the sense in which Bhagavan says in between. Also, there's another implication of in between. The only connection between sat-cit, which is a fundamental reality, and all this multiplicity that we see is ego, because it's only in the view of ego that this body and all other phenomena exist. So the ego is the link, so to speak, between sat-cit, which is what alone is real, and all this unreal appearance, because it's only in the view of ego that all these things seem to exist. So that's another sense, another implication of the term ideo. And then Bhagavan says, this is chit jada granti. Here, chit refers to sat-cit, the real awareness, the existence awareness. Jada refers to the body, which is insentient. And granti means not. So when awareness and the body seemingly become entangled in the form of ego, that is called chit jada granti, the knot between chit and jada. It's also bondage, because having limited ourselves as the body, we are now bound within so many limitations, so many constraints. This is jivan, because this is the soul. This is what we. Our individual existence is what is referred to as jiva. It is nupame, the subtle body. It is ahaṇḍa, ego. It is samsara, this samsara. That is the entire cycle of births and deaths, and everything that we experience in this cycle of births and deaths, and all karma and the fruits of karma, etc., etc., etc. Everything is. All of it is collectively called samsara. And this samsara is nothing but this false I, because it's only in the view of this false I, this I that has risen as the extent of a body, but samsara seems to exist. It is also manam, because what the mind, though we often use the term mind to refer to the totality of all thoughts, but the one essential thought of the mind is the first thought I, that is ego. So what the mind essentially is only this ego, this false I that rises at the extent of a body. Sorry, I've just forgotten the context in which I was saying this. Yes, I was saying about all objects borrow their existence from ego, because they seem to exist only in the view of ego. And ego borrows its existence from sat-cit, because though ego as ego is unreal, it is not entirely unreal. It is unreal as ego, as this mixed awareness, I am the body, it is unreal. But in its essential nature as I am, it is real. That is... if we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, that snake is unreal as a snake, but it is real as a rope. Likewise, ego is unreal as ego, but it is real as sat-cit. So ego has borrowed its existence and its awareness from sat-cit. So what actually exists is only sat-cit. Because ego doesn't always exist, it must have borrowed its existence from something. It has borrowed its existence only from sat-cit. And ego then lends its borrowed existence to all other things, because all other things seem to exist only in its view. So I said all this to explain the implication of this first adjective that Bhagavan uses, aṇādi. What actually exists must always exist, and what always exists cannot have either a beginning or an end. The next word, aṇanta, one meaning of aṇanta. Anta means end. So aṇanta means what has no end. Just like ādi means beginning, aṇādi means what has no beginning. So aṇanta means it has no end. But it also, aṇanta is used in a broader sense than just what doesn't have an end in time. And what aṇanta implies, it doesn't have an end in the sense of it doesn't have any limit. So aṇanta is a term used in Sanskrit to refer to what is infinite, what has no limits at all, what has no end at all, is aṇanta. So, but in Sanskrit, the word aṇanta means not only endless, it also means limitless, in other words, infinite. So aṇanta means it is infinite. This is the very nature of Brahman. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, a very well-known definition of Brahman is satyam, jnanam, aṇantam, Brahma. That is, satyam means sat, or what actually exists, what existence, or what is real, or what actually exists is sat. So satya. Jnana, in this context, it means awareness. So that is, so satya is sat, jnana is chit, and aṇanta means infinite. So the very nature of Brahman is infinite sat-chit, infinite satya jnana, satyam jnanam, infinite existence and infinite awareness. So this is a very, very important word, because when it is said it is infinite, it doesn't mean infinite in any limited sense. Like the term infinite is used in many different contexts. For example, in mathematics, they use the term infinite, and there are different infinities. So that is a very limited sense of the term infinite. What is truly infinite has no limits whatsoever. Likewise, theologians, they say that God is infinite, but then they qualify his infinity by saying he's got infinite knowledge, he's got infinite power, he's got infinite love. But if they were to, if the dualistic theologians were to really take, if they were to accept the meaning of aṇanta, of infinite, in an unqualified sense, they would have to acknowledge that that there cannot be anything other than God. If God is the one infinite whole, if he is truly infinite in all ways, I mean, if there's absolutely no limit at all on God's nature, nothing can be other than him. Because if anything were other than God, that would put a limit on the extent of God. God is everything except this other thing. So nothing can be other than God. Therefore, God alone is what we actually are. So this is why Advaita refuses to acknowledge that there's any distinction between God and jiva, between God and soul, between what we essentially are is God. God cannot be anything other than ourselves. That is why Bhagavan said in verse 24 of Upadēśa Undiyār, which we talked about a few months ago, Irakum yākayal isa jivagal oru porle ava, that by existing nature, God and soul are one substance. That one substance is sat-cit or sat-cit-ānanda. That God and soul cannot be different. So, and he says, irakum yākayal, in their being nature, in their nature, their existing nature. That means as sat, they are one substance. And sat, of course, sat is not other than chit, is not other than aṇanda. So sat, that implies God and soul are both nothing but sat-cit-ānanda. The difference is only in the upadi unavai ver undīpaṛa. It's only the adjunct awareness that makes them seem to be different. That is, in the view of jiva, the ego, ego seems to have limited itself as adjuncts, as a certain set of adjuncts, namely a body consisting of 5 sheaths. So I am this, not that. So as ego, we seem to have limited ourselves. Because we have limited ourselves, God, who is the one infinite whole, seems to be something other than ourselves. So by limiting ourselves, we make it it seems to us that God is something other than us. If God is something other than us, therefore God is limited. So we also impose adjuncts upon God. That is, what are our adjuncts? Firstly, we take ourselves to be this finite body, consisting of 5 sheaths: body, life, mind, intellect, and will. So we limit ourselves at these, and because we are limited, we have limited knowledge, whereas God is all-knowing. We have limited power, whereas God is all-powerful. Our love is also limited. We like some things, we dislike other things, whereas God's love is infinite and all-embracing. God doesn't see anything other than himself, so he loves all as himself. So we not only do we impose adjuncts upon us, we impose adjuncts upon God. All those adjuncts, we say he's infinitely knowing, he's infinitely powerful, he's infinitely loving. But we cannot know the true infinite nature of God. That is, though we talk of him as infinite, how can the finite mind know what is infinite? The finite mind can only know what is finite. So our very conception of God, even though we say he's infinite, we cannot conceive of his infinity. So we cannot know God so long as we take ourselves to be anything other than God. The only way to know God is to be God. That's why Bhagavan says in the next verse, knowing oneself without adjuncts is itself knowing God. So it's only by knowing ourselves as we actually are, then only we can know God as he actually is. Otherwise, God is for us just a concept, just a belief. We've got a certain idea God is infinite, but we've got a finite conception of what is infinite. We cannot really conceive what is infinite so long as we take ourselves to be finite. When Bhagavan says that aṉanta, or when the Upanishad, I mean Taittiriya Upanishad, as I say, that says that defines Brahman as satyam, jnanam, aṇantam. When it is said so, that is, we need to understand that is a completely unqualified, in a completely unqualified sense, they are using that term aṇanta. They're not just saying unlimited in certain respects, unlimited in all respects. There is absolutely no limitation whatsoever. Since there is no limitation, that means nothing can be outside of Brahman or sat-cit-ānanda. So because it's unlimited, nothing can be other than that or outside of that. Also, when it is said without limits, that means not only are there no external limits, but it is also there are no internal limits. So in other words, God is indivisible. That is why the next adjective that Bhagavan uses, the third adjective he uses, is akhaṇḍa. Akhaṇḍa literally means unbroken. That implies undivided, indivisible. Why is he indivisible? Because if he could be divided in any way, that would be an internal limitation. But he is aṇanta. He's without any limitation of any kind whatsoever. So he is indivisible. That is God or Brahman or Sat-cit-ānanda or our own real nature. Taṇādu, as he says here, our own real nature is unlimited. Is unlimited and therefore undivided, indivisible. We can never divide ourselves. So these are the 3 adjectives he uses. Then he uses 3 nouns. since he has already said they are indivisible, we need to understand he's not talking about three different things. One thing called sat, another thing called chit, and another thing called aṇanda. He's talking about one thing that can be described as sat, it can be described as chit, and it can be described as aṇanda. It is all of these. And these are inseparable. That is, sat means existence. Chit means awareness, aṇanda means happiness. There is no awareness or happiness other than existence. There is no existence other than awareness or other than happiness. And there is no awareness other than existence and happiness. And there's no happiness other than existence and awareness. So these three are in the limited view of our mind, these seem to be three things. When we talk about existence, we're talking about one thing. When we're talking about awareness, we seem to be talking about another thing. When we talk about happiness, we seem to be talking about another thing. Yes, I exist, but I'm miserable. I'm not at all happy, we say. Because this is because of the limitation of our mind. We divide that which is indivisible and see existence, awareness, and happiness as if they're three separate things, whereas in fact they are one and the same. So let's go through these one by one. Why is it said, why is Brahman described as sat-cit-ānanda? It is sat because it alone is what actually exists. As I said earlier when I was explaining the implication of the word aṇādi, whatever exists must always exist. And since what always exists is infinite, there cannot be anything other than it. So it is one only without a second. Ekam eva advaityam. So there cannot be any existence other than that one existence, which is called sat, we're referred to here as sat, which means Brahman or our own real nature. So there is no existence other than sat. And sat is one and indivisible. So there's nothing other than that. So it is the only existence. All things that seem to exist, they only borrow their existence from sat, from that which actually exists. As I explained earlier, just all the objects borrow their existence from the subject, and the subject borrows its existence from sat-chit, from existence, from pure existence. So that pure existence sat, that alone is what actually exists. So there's nothing other than sat. There cannot be anything other than sat. How could anything exist other than existence? It's a contradiction in terms to say, it exists, but it's other than existence. So sat is that pure existence, that fullness of existence. There's nothing other than that sat. That alone is what is. So that is sat, which is what Bhagavan also refers to in Tamil as ulladu, what actually exists. Chit, awareness. There is only one awareness. There cannot be multiple awarenesses, because awareness is not. When we see multiple things, now when we look out and we see so many objects in the world, we see so many thoughts in our mind and so on, so many thoughts, feelings and so on, we see multiplicity. All things that are multiple are forms of one kind or another, maybe physical forms or mental forms, but they're all forms. They all have defining characteristics, things that distinguish them from other things. So all forms are limited because they're distinguished from something else. But awareness is not a form. It is that in which all forms appear and disappear. So awareness is formless. Being formless, it's without limit. And being without limit, it cannot be divisible. There cannot be many chits. There can only be one chit. So, as I said earlier, though as ego we seem to exist and we seem to be aware, we have borrowed our existence from sat and we borrowed our awareness from chit. Of course, sat-cit are one and the same thing. So we borrow both our existence and our awareness from sat-cit. So we have no existence and no awareness of our own. Our existence is only a borrowed existence. It's not our own existence. That's why we seem to exist as ego in waking and dream. We cease to be ego in sleep. How can we be this ego which comes into existence and ceases to exist? We can only be that which exists always. That is I am. That is sat. That is chit. That is I am. When we say the words I am, what does I am mean? I am means I exist. So I am is a statement of our existence. It is also implies our awareness, because only what is aware of itself can refer to itself as I. So the I is the awareness. Of course, awareness we cannot separate from. That is this within this term I am. Existence is stated explicitly, and awareness is stated implicitly. So I am Brahman. That is, I am is the very nature of Brahman. There is no Brahman other than I am. There is no I am other than Brahman. That is why Bhagavan sometimes said, the greatest of all the Mahavakyas, greatest in the sense of the Mahavakya that expresses the truth most aptly and correctly, is the Mahavakya not in the Vedas, but in the Bible. Because in the Bible, God, in the form of a burning bush, when Moses asked him, "Who are you?" he said, "I am that I am." That is what how Bhagavan interpreted I am that I am. I am I. That is, Bhagavan often uses the term in Tamil, ṇaṇādi, or in Sanskrit, aham. Aham, or ṇaṇādi means I am I. That is what Bhagavan took. That is, Bhagavan pointed out, that is what God meant in there. I am nothing other than I. Because in English, when we say I am, by itself, am refers to our existence. But when we say, I am Michael, or I am whoever, I am such and such a person, am is there not referring to my existence, it's referring to my identity. When I say I am Michael, that means I have identified myself with Michael. Likewise, if I say I am Brahman, I'm identifying myself with Brahman. Brahman is not, that is, the Bhagavan said, I am this or I am that is ego. That is false. What is real is only I am. And if you want to identify what is I am nothing other than I. So we cannot be anything other than ourselves. So the only true statement of our identity can be I am I. Even to say I am Brahman, it is a less than perfect way of saying it, because when we say I am Brahman, we seem to have two things. One, I, identifying itself with Brahman. So Brahman is nothing other than I, and I am that I. So therefore I am Brahman, but it's better to express it as just I am I. Because there cannot be, we cannot be anything other than ourselves. So the best way to express our true identity is to express it as aham, ṇaṇādi, I am I. So that is the significance of that statement in the Bible, as explained by Bhagavan. So that has a very, very deep meaning. That's why Bhagavan said it's an even better Mahavakya than the Mahavakyas in the Upanishads, because for Mahavakyas in the Upanishads, there are 4 Mahavakyas, one for each of the Vedas. There's Tattvamasi, you are that. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. I am Atma Brahma. That is this self, this very self is Brahman, and Prajnanam Brahman, pure awareness is Brahman. What do these 4 statements all have in common? They are all pointing out that Brahman is nothing other than ourself. When it is said Tattvamasi, That means there is no tat other than tvum. So that is the purpose of the Mahavakyas, is to turn our attention back towards ourselves by pointing out that God or Brahman or happiness or sat-cit-ānanda, whatever we choose to call it, that is nothing other than ourselves. So the purpose of the Mahavakyas is to reveal our true identity, what we actually are. The best way to express what we actually are, that is, there's a good reason why they say tattvamasi or aham brahmasmi or so on, because the nature of the mind is to always seek happiness, to always seek things outside itself. Because we, as ego, we always feel deficient. So we are trying to fill up some deficiency. We are trying to we're trying to make good some deficiency. So when we want to make good the deficiency, we look for something outside ourselves. So we look for whether we are seeking wealth or whether we are seeking political power or whether we are seeking worldly pleasures or whether we are seeking God or whether we are seeking knowledge, science or whatever. We are always seeking things outside ourselves, trying to fill up the sense of deficiency. So the purpose of the Mahavakyas is to say, whatever you may be seeking outside ourselves, obviously the highest thing to seek outside ourselves is God or the ultimate reality. Even God or the ultimate reality that we are seeking, that is nothing other than you. Whatever we are seeking, that is ourself. We are nothing other than that. So if we want to know Brahman, if we want to know God, we cannot know God as another, because as God is aṇādi, aṇanta, he's unlimited. Brahman is unlimited. Since he's unlimited, so long as we know him as something other than ourselves, we know him that we have limited himself because he's something other than ourselves. Whatever is other than ourselves, we are limited, and whatever is other than ourselves is also limited. So God cannot be anything, God or Brahman or whatever we choose to call it, Allah or whatever, Nirvana, or whatever we choose to call it, Buddha or whatever, Buddha nature or whatever we choose to call it, it cannot be something other than ourselves. Because whatever is other than ourselves is an object. How can God be an object? Objects depend for their seeming existence upon the subject. God cannot be an object. God must be the reality of the subject. So the purpose of the Mahavakyas is to turn our attention back to ourselves. So there's a very good reason why those 4 Mahavakyas are there in the Upanishads. But what Bhagavan pointed out when he said the greatest of the Mahavakyas is what is revealed in the Bible, is that even to say, I am Brahman, is not quite correct, because we have an idea. When we talk about Brahman, we've got an idea. We may think of Brahman, okay, what did the word Brahman, etymologically, it means that which is expanded. So it implies the infinite whole. But even to think I am the infinite whole, we've got some idea of that infinite whole. We cannot know the infinite without being the infinite. Knowing ourselves alone is being us, or being ourselves alone is knowing ourselves, as Bhagavan says in verse 26. So we cannot know the infinite as another. We can only know the infinite as ourselves. So we cannot know Brahman, we cannot know anything without knowing what we ourselves actually are. So the purpose of the Mahavakyas is to turn our attention back to ourselves. But then we need to refine our attention, our understanding. It's not that I am Brahman, but the ultimate truth is, the ultimate truth of our identity is I am I. Why? Because we cannot be anything other than ourselves. As soon as we talk about Brahman or God, we are talking as if it's something other than I. So the best, the most perfect expression of our own existence, our own reality, what we actually are, what is our true identity, I am only I. That is why Bhagavan often uses this term, I am I, in the context of, for example, in verse 20 of Upadēśa Undiyār, in verse 19, Bhagavan said, when one investigates within what the place from which one rises as I. What the place is from which one rises as I. The place from which we rise as I is only from ourselves, from our own real nature. So when we investigate that, I will die. ṇaṇādi. Taṇādiyal literally means it bends down its head. That implies it will die. That's a colloquial way of saying it will die. This is jnana vichara. That's what he says in verse 19. Then in verse 20, he says, in the place where I merges, in other words, in the place where I subsides and becomes one with its source, merges back into its source, that ādu, the one, what he says in the verses, ṇaṇādi taṇādu, in the place where I merges, ṇaṇādi ondru ādu taṇādu, that ādu, ondru, the one, taṇādu, it appears, taṇāha can mean either spontaneously or of its own accord. It can also mean as oneself. ṇaṇādi, as I am I. Why does he say as I am I? Because the ego, the I that rises is always aware of itself as I am this or I am that. I am this body. I am Michael, or I am Kumar, or I am whoever. It doesn't matter. We identify ourselves with the name and form of a body. So the awareness I am this or I am that is ego. But that is a false identity, that we are identifying ourselves with something other than ourselves. Our real identity, our true identity is only I am I. I am nothing other than I. So Bhagavan emphasizes that when ego dies, the awareness that will then shine forth is in the form I am I. Of course, not the words I am I. There'll be the recognition of ourselves as we actually are can be best expressed in words as I am I. In exactly the same way in verse 30 of Uludunapdu, Bhagavan says almost exactly the same thing. What he says in verse 30, as soon as the mind reaches the heart, inwardly investigating who am I, when he who is I dies, that is when ego dies, one thing appears spontaneously as I am I. And likewise in Anvayam, he also says the same thing in the second verse. He begins the second verse of Anvayam. He says, since the thought, this body composed of flesh itself is I, alone is the one thread on which all the various thoughts are strung. Why is this first thought, why is this thought that this body of flesh itself is I, why is this the thread on which all other thoughts are strung? Because this thought, I am this body, refers to ego. Ego is the subject. It's only in the view of the subject that all objects exist. So all other thoughts exist only in the view of the first thought, I. So this is the one thread on which all other thoughts are strung. No other thought can exist without this first thought, I, first thought I means the ego, which is always aware of itself as I am this body. That's why he says, since the thought, this the body composed of flesh itself is I, alone is the one thread on which all the various thoughts are strung. If one goes within investigating what is the place from which I spread, in other words, what's the place from which I rise and spread out as all this, thoughts will cease, and in the cave, meaning in the cave of one's heart, atmajnana means pure awareness, pure self-awareness. How do you say? ṇaṇādi guheul tānai tihurum atmajnanamai. That atmajnanam will shine as oneself or spontaneously within the cave as I am I. So again, Bhagavan is emphasizing, when we know what we actually are, when ego is this, when the false awareness, I am this or I am that, namely ego, is destroyed, what the truth that is then revealed is, oh, I am nothing other than I am I alone. This is the significance of this term that Bhagavan often uses, ṇaṇādi. And in Sanskrit, he uses, in various verses in Sanskrit, Bhagavan uses the term aham. Obviously, in verse 20 of Upadēśa Saṅgraham, which is a translation of verse 20 of Upadēśa Undiyār, he uses the term aham. In the verse Hridaya Guhara Madhye Kevalam Brahma Matram Ahamiti, that Brahman is always shining as I am I. So Bhagavan, this is a very favorite term of Bhagavan, I am I. And that's why he pointed out to the statement in the Bible, I am that I am, which he interpreted to mean just I am I. That is the true expression. That is our real true identity. It's nothing, we are nothing other than ourselves. I am I. Tāne tattvam. As he says in Akram, verse 43, I think, he says, Tāne tattvam. Tāne, it can either mean oneself alone, it can either be a very emphasized form of oneself, that is, Tān means oneself. Tāne is an intensified form of oneself. Tāne is still more intensified. Tāne is still more intensified. So it can be a very intensified form of, so oneself alone is the reality. It can either mean that, very emphatically, or it can mean Tāne. Oneself is only oneself is the reality. What is the truth? Only Tāne. Oneself alone is oneself. So here again, Bhagavan is repeatedly emphasizing this, but our real nature is only, that is our real identity. What we actually are is only ourself. Tāne. Oneself alone is oneself. There's nothing other than oneself. I alone am I. So I said all this again. Okay, I said this. I can't remember exactly how I got into explaining that. It was, but about the oneness of sat and chit. That is, the word I refers both to our existence and to our awareness. And that our existence and our awareness are nothing other than our existence and awareness. It's false to say I am this or I am that. Even to say I am Brahman or Shivoham, Soham. That is not the that is said to remind us that we are nothing other than but what we have hitherto been seeking outside, Brahman or Shiva or God or he, that which we've been seeking outside is nothing other than ourselves. But the ultimate truth is, the final experience will be, oh, I am I. There's nothing other than I. Why? Because how can there be anything other than I? I is, as Bhagavan says, it's beginningless. It's got no beginning, it's got no end. It's infinite and it's unbroken. So how can there be anything other than I? So what he refers to here as sat-cit-ānanda is only I. So that's another thing to say about this verse. That is, what he actually says in this verse, if we take the whole verse together, if one knows what the nature of oneself is, then beginningless, endless, unbroken existence, awareness, happiness. What does he mean by just saying then this? There are two implications here. One is, if we know what our real nature is, then it will be clear to us that our real nature is beginningless, endless, unbroken, sat-cit-ānanda. The other implied meaning is, if we know what we actually are, then what will exist and shine is only beginningless, endless, unbroken sat-cit-ānanda. And another important point to bear in mind here, though he says that is the first clause of this sentence, if one knows what the nature of oneself is a conditional sentence. But we shouldn't therefore take it to mean, only when I know myself, then there will be only beginningless, endless, and unbroken sat-cit-ānanda. Because if the existence of beginningless, endless, unbroken sat-cit-ānanda were dependent on were conditional on our knowing ourselves, then it would have a beginning. When we don't know ourselves, then there's no sat-cit-ānanda. Only when we know ourselves there is sat-cit-ānanda, that is obviously not the meaning. What he means when he says, if one knows what nature of oneself is, then it will be clear that what actually exists, what we actually are, what is only that beginningless, endless, unbroken sat-cit-ānanda. So Bhagavan is clearly implying here that sat-cit-ānanda is our real nature. As he said in the first answer he gave, the answer he gave to Sri Prakasham Pillai's first two questions, the two answers he gave. The first question Sri Prakasham Pillai asked was, Nana, Swami, who am I? To which Bhagavan replied, Arivainān, awareness alone is I. Later, Sri Prakasham Pillai added some other things, the neti sentences. He added that for his own clarification. But what Bhagavan actually replied to his first question is, when he asked, who am I? Bhagavan gave a straightforward, simple answer. Arivainān, awareness alone is I. Then the second question he asked was, what is the nature of that awareness? Arivin Sarupamena. To which Bhagavan replied, Sat-cit-ānanda. So the implication of those two questions and answers is what we actually are is only Sat-cit-ānanda. So what Bhagavan is talking about here, he's talking about what our real nature is. Because he begins this, if one knows what one's real nature is, then only this will exist. So Sat-cit-ānanda is what we actually are, and it is also what alone actually exists, as will become clear if we know what is the real nature of ourselves. So I was explaining, I've explained the three adjectives, and I've explained the three nouns. So it is existence. It is also awareness. That is, our real nature is not only pure being, pure existence, it's also pure awareness. Pure awareness means, chit doesn't mean that which is aware of things other than itself is ego. That is often referred to as chitabhasa. A bhasa can be interpreted in two ways. The basic meaning of a bhasa is a semblance, something that seems to be like something else. So by extension, it means a reflection. If you see your reflection in a mirror, if you look in a mirror in the morning when you're brushing your teeth or shaving or whatever, you see your reflection there. That what you are seeing in the mirror is not yourself. It's a likeness of yourself. It's a semblance of yourself. So chitabhasa means a likeness of awareness, a semblance of awareness, something that seems to be awareness, but is not real awareness. So ego is chitabhasa. The real awareness is only chit. And in the view of chit, since chit is aṇanta, infinite, there cannot be anything other than chit. So chit, pure awareness, is never aware of anything other than itself. That is why it's called pure awareness. Ego is an impure awareness because it's awareness of objects. The objects of awareness are the impurities. And those objects of awareness exist because we've limited ourselves as an object, namely this body. So in the view of chit, which is never limited as in any way whatsoever, because it's aṇanta, it's infinite, unlimited. in the view of Chit, there is never anything other than itself. So pure awareness. So what we actually are is pure being, pure awareness. We're not, that our real nature is not to be aware of this or that. It's just to be aware. That is, it is what Bhagavan sometimes referred to as sutatrarivu. Bhagavan referred to ego as sutarivu, or the ego's knowledge as sutarivu. We can take it either way. Sutarivu, suttu means pointing or indicating. In other words, what he implies by the term sutarivu is awareness that is aware of anything other than itself. Then, in other words, awareness of objects. I often translate sutarivu to convey the intended meaning. I refer to it as transitive awareness. Transitive means, in this, that is, the word transitive is a term that's used in grammar. Some verbs are transitive, some verbs are intransitive. If a verb can, or some can be both transitive or intransitive. If a verb can take a direct object, if the verb takes a direct object, it is transitive. So, for example, a verb like kick. Well, if you say kick, he kicked. What did he kick? Did he kick a ball, or did he kick the wall, or did he kick a door? Or then it takes a direct object. But if you another verb like stand doesn't take an object. If you say, oh, he's standing, you can't say, what is he standing? It makes no sense. There can be no object for the. So some verbs are transitive, some verbs are intransitive, or some can be either. You like some verbs like open. You can open the door, or it can open. The door opens. If you say the door opens, you don't ask, oh, what does the door open? But if you say, oh, he opened, what did he open? Did he open his mouth, or did he open his eyes, or did he open the door? We expect an object. So some verbs can be either transitive or intransitive. But anyway, that's just to explain the meaning of the English words transitive and intransitive. So I refer to what Bhagavan calls sutarivu, I refer to as transitive awareness. That's awareness of objects, awareness of anything other than ourselves is a transitive awareness. But pure awareness is, as Bhagavan said, sutatrarivu. That is, sutatrarivu means awareness that is devoid of pointing. So in other words, awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself, that I refer to as intransitive awareness. That is, pure awareness is intransitive. It's not awareness of anything, it's just awareness. And if we think about it, in order to be aware of anything, we must be aware. But in order to be aware, we don't have to be aware of anything. That is, we couldn't be aware of anything if we were not aware. But we can be aware without being aware of anything. In sleep, we are aware without being aware of anything. Because in sleep, we are aware without being aware of anything, we wrongly mistake sleep to be a state of absence of awareness, because we take the transitive awareness, the awareness of objects, the awareness of phenomena, we take that to be awareness. And so in sleep, there's no such awareness. We're not aware of anything in sleep. So, sleep was a state of non-awareness. It's a state of unconsciousness. But how do we know we were in that state of unconsciousness? How when we wake up from sleep, we are clearly aware of having been in a state in which we were not aware of anything. So how can we know that we were in that state if we were not aware in that state? So sleep is a state of pure intransitive awareness. We are aware without being aware of anything. That is the meaning of sutatrarivu. So that is the nature of Chit. Chit is sutatrarivu, awareness that is not aware of anything. As Bhagavan said in the previous verse, that the awareness that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance, of awareness or ignorance of anything other than itself, that alone is real awareness. Why? Because in that state of pure self-knowledge, in the state of where we are knowing ourselves by just being ourselves, there's nothing else for knowing. Why is there nothing else for knowing? Because all that actually exists is only sat-cit-ānanda. There's nothing other than sat-cit-ānanda. So as I say, the sat means pure being, chit means pure awareness, and aṇanda means pure happiness. We've talked so far about why the reality, what actually exists, it is pure existence and it's pure awareness. Because if it were not pure awareness, as Bhagavan says in verse 23, there cannot be any awareness other than what exists to know what exists. So what exists must be awareness. If what exists were not awareness, then awareness would be non-existent, and there couldn't be any knowledge of awareness. But there is no meaning in talking about existence independent of awareness. There is no existence other than awareness. That's why Bhagavan says, what exists is awareness. That implies that awareness alone is what exists. So the nature of awareness is not only awareness, but also existence, sat-cit. So to understand the oneness of sat and chit is quite easy. I mean, it's not too difficult for us to understand that. But why does Bhagavan say that it is not only existence, pure existence and pure awareness? Why does he imply that it's also pure happiness? To understand that, it is useful to refer to the first verse of, the first paragraph of ṇaṇādi. This is a paragraph but didn't form part of the original answers that Bhagavan gave to Shiv Kashyapalai. Bhagavan added this paragraph when he rewrote ṇaṇādi in the form of an essay. What he says in this, he gives several arguments here to show that happiness is our own real nature. What we actually are is nothing but happiness. He says, Sakala jivagalum dukkhamembadindri epodum sukhamai iraka virambadalam. Since all sentient beings, all jivas, want or like to be happy always without what is called misery. That is, we all want to be happy. We want unadulterated happiness. We want pure happiness, infinite happiness. We don't want the happiness that is limited by, in any way, by the possibility of experiencing dissatisfaction or unhappiness. We want pure happiness. We want unlimited happiness. That's what we all want. So that's one reason, since we all want to be happy. And since for everyone, the greatest love is only for ourselves. So we all want to be happy and we all have greatest love for ourselves. And then in the third clause, he says, priyataku sukhame karanamadalam, since happiness alone is the cause of love. That is, why do we love something? We love things. If we love an object or we love a person, we love them because they make us happy, or at least we think they have the potential to make us happy. That is why we love something. So the cause for the cause for love is only happiness. We only love those things that make us happy or that we expect will make us happy. So here Bhagavan has said there are three since clauses. Firstly, he says we all want to be happy without misery. In other words, we all want unqualified happiness. We all have greatest love for ourselves, and happiness alone is the cause of love. Since we love ourselves, why do we love ourselves? Because we ourselves are happiness. That is the implication. And then he goes on to say, in the next sentence, he refers to, sorry, not the next sentence. The next clause is a long clause. He says, Manamatra nidrayal dinam anubhavikum tan subhavamana achukate adeya tanne taṉādiyal vendam. In order to attain that happiness, the happiness he's been referring to in the first three clauses, tan subhavamana achukate, that happiness which is one's own subhava, one's own real nature, one's own svabhava. So here he says, why does he say it's our own real nature? Because of the reasons given in the first three clauses. Because we all want to be happy, we've got greatest love for ourselves, and happiness alone is the cause for love. So since we love ourselves, that means we ourselves must be happiness. So that's one reason. Another reason why he refers to happiness as our own real nature is what he says here, manamatra nidrayal dinamanubhavikam. That is, we experience happiness daily in sleep, which is devoid of mind. Since there's no mind in sleep, there's nothing other than ourself. What exists in sleep is only ourself. It's only in the mind that other things appear to exist. So in the state which is devoid of mind, that means a state which is devoid of everything. What exists in sleep is only ourself. And since we're perfectly happy in sleep, what do we have to infer? We ourselves are happiness. The happiness we experience in sleep is not something other than ourself, it is ourself, because there's nothing other than ourself in sleep. So since we're happy in sleep, happiness is our own real nature. So he's given several reasons here why happiness is our own real nature. And since happiness is our own real nature, what do we have to do to attain that happiness, to experience that happiness? Tanne tan aridovendam. Oneself, knowing oneself is necessary. So he says in this verse, verse 28, if one knows oneself, if one knows what the real nature of oneself is, that means if you know what you actually are, then beginningless, endless, unbroken, sat-cit-ānanda. Then we'll know ourselves to be beginningless, endless, and unbroken, sat-cit-ānanda. So, and then just to complete this paragraph, since I referred to it, in the second and final sentence of this paragraph, he says adaku for that. That means for knowing oneself, nana innam jnana vicharame mukhya sadhanam. The investigation, the awareness investigation, jnana vichara means awareness investigation, called who am I, is the mukhya sadhana. This is the principal means. That is, we cannot know ourselves without investigating ourselves. So all other means may be, all the puja, japa, dhyana, bhakti, yoga, all these other practices, they may be useful in drawing us to this path. But ultimately, it's only by investigating what we actually are that we can know what we actually are. How can we possibly know what we actually are? How can we see what we actually are if we don't look at ourselves? How can we know what we actually are if we don't attend to ourselves? So ultimately, whatever other spiritual path we may follow, ultimately we all need to come to this path of self-investigation. Because without investigating ourselves, we cannot know ourselves. And without knowing ourselves, we cannot experience the infinite happiness that we alone actually are. So this is one place where Bhagavan talks about happiness being our real nature. Again, in the 14th paragraph, he begins the 14th paragraph by saying, Sukham embadu atmavin sarupame. That is, what is called happiness is only the swarupa of oneself. That is is the real nature of oneself. And then he says in the next sentence, Sukhamum atma sarupamum verandru. Happiness and our own real nature, the real nature of ourself, are not different. Atma sukham andre ulladu. The happiness that is ourself, that is our Atma Sukham implies in this context, the happiness that is our own real nature, the happiness that we actually are, that alone exists. Atma Sukham andre ulladu. Aduve satyam, that alone is happiness, is satyam, that alone is what is real. And so what is Brahman? According to the Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahman is satyam, jnanam, aṇantam, infinite. And according to Bhagavan, what is satyam is only Atma Sukham. So wherever we look in the pure teachings of Advaita, or in Bhagavan's teachings, which are the purest of the pure form of Advaita, we find only the same thing. However we approach the matter, what we actually are is nothing but beginningless, infinite, indivisible sat-cit-ānanda. Aṇādi, aṇanta, akhaṇḍa, sat-cit-ānanda, as Bhagavan says here. Before concluding, I'll just briefly refer to the Sanskrit version of this verse, in which, because Bhagavan wrote the Sanskrit in a slightly shorter meter, he wasn't able to pack so much in as he was able to pack in Tamil. What he says in Sanskrit is Kim Sarupamiti Atmadarshane. Atmadarshane literally means in seeing oneself. It implies when one sees oneself. Darshana means seeing. Atmadarshana means seeing oneself. Darshane is a locative case form of darshana. So darshane means in seeing oneself. That implies when one sees oneself. Kim Sarupamiti. Thus, what is one's real nature? That implies when one sees oneself by investigating what swarupa is. In other words, what one's own real nature. Swarupa here means our own real nature. So when one sees oneself by investigating what one's own real nature is, that's the first line. Then the second line, avya, abhava, apurna, chitsukam. Avya means immutable or imperishable. Abhava means unborn. As Bhagavan says in Tamil, it's beginningless. Because it's beginningless, it has no birth. It never came into existence, and it will never cease to exist. So avya implies it's aṉanta. It's endless. It will never come to an end. So it's imperishable, but it doesn't have the full connotation of aṉanta. Aṉanta, as I say, aṉanta means not only endless, but also limitless or infinite. So it's avya, yes, I hope I'm pronouncing that rightly. Avya means immutable and imperishable. That is imperishable because it can never cease to exist. Immutable because it can never change. It is what is. If something changes from one thing to another thing, it is one thing at one time and another thing at another time. When it changes, it ceases to be what it was previously, and it becomes something else. So it has an ending and a beginning. So that which is beginningless and endless cannot undergo any change. So what is imperishable and unborn can never undergo any change. So it's in avya, as I say, it means both immutable, unchangeable. Immutable means unchangeable, and imperishable. It cannot die. It cannot cease to exist. But why? Because it was never born. That which is never born always exists, because it alone is what actually exists. Then the next word he says is apurna. Apurna means full or whole or complete. It implies, again, what is infinite. Because if something is whole, then that apurna is the fullness of all that is. That is the totality. So it implies what is infinite. Chit sukham. Chit means awareness, and sukham means happiness. Bhagavan doesn't mention sat here, but that is simply, we should understand, since chit is sat, he's referring here to sat-cit-ānanda. But because of the shortness of the meter, he couldn't fit in the word sat here, but it's obviously implied, because chit sukham is chit and sukham cannot be anything other than what exists. So they are sat. So that's in the Sanskrit version. In the Malayalam version, it's a slightly longer version. We need not go through the whole Malayalam version, but there's one word at the end. The final word is onne. I think onne means only one. This is what we should infer from the word aṉanta. When Bhagavan says that sat-cit-ānanda is aṉanta, it's infinite, that means nothing can be other than it. So it alone exists. So that I'd explained this earlier, but it is aṉanta. What is aṉanta must be one only without a second. And another definition of Brahman that's given in one of the Upanishads is ekam eva advaityam, one only without a second. Why is it one only without a second? Because it's infinite. What is infinite there cannot be anything other than what is infinite. So it is one only without a second. Therefore, that oneness that is clearly implied here in the Tamil is by the word aṉanta. He states it explicitly in the Malayalam version by ending it with the word onne. How he describes it in Malayalam, the aṇādi, aṉanta, akhaṇḍa, sat-cit-ānanda, he says antavum adium illade. That means without end or beginning. Taṉādum, it will shine forth, or it will shine. Akhaṇḍa, unbroken, indivisible. Akhaṇḍa literally means unbroken. It implies indivisible. Cid-ānanda vastu onne. Chit means awareness. Aṇanda means happiness. Vastu means the substance. What actually exists. Just like the gold is the substance of a gold bangle. So Brahman is the Vastu. It is the one substance that appears as all this. So Vastu here implies Sat. What actually exists, that is, existence alone is the Vastu. The one substance that appears as all this multiplicity is only Sat. So he's using the word here, Vastu, to refer to Sat. How he expresses the earlier part of the sentence is, if oneself once sees oneself itself, if oneself sees oneself itself, in this way implies by investigating what actually is one's form, taṇādu rupam. Form here means one's real nature. It implies swarupa. So what actually is one's real nature? What actually is one's real nature? If one sees oneself, if oneself sees oneself even once, but that one time we see ourselves as we actually are, that is the final time. So if we want to see ourselves as we actually are, by investigating what is our real nature, then the beginningless, endless, akhaṇḍa, cidāṉanda vastu alone. So he emphasizes that alone in Malayalam. What is implied in Tamil is stated explicitly there. So the full meaning of this, the full meaning that Bhagavan wanted to convey, he's conveyed perfectly in Sanskrit, in this Tamil version. He's expressed the same thing in a slightly expanded version in Malayalam, bringing out, being explicit about some of the implications, like the implication that this alone is what actually exists, and this is what will shine forth. If we know ourselves, what then shines forth is this. And he's implied the same in Sanskrit, but he couldn't convey fully, but it's all implied there in the Sanskrit version. So this is a very, very important verse. What are we all seeking? We're all seeking to know, who am I? So Bhagavan is giving us a foretaste of what is the answer. So people often ask, what is the answer to this question, who am I? Well, when Bhagavan spoke about who am I, he didn't mean it merely as a question. He didn't say, question who am I, or ask who am I. He said, investigate who am I. But if we want to know what is the answer is not anything in words. The answer is when ego is swallowed, the reality that then shines forth as I am I. What is the nature of that reality? It is aṇādi, aṇanta, akhaṇḍa, sat-cit-ānanda, beginningless, infinite, indivisible, sat-cit-ānanda. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Thank you, Michael.
Sorry, I've gone. I don't know. We still have some time for questions, do we, or not?
Yes, we do. Greg, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. This is a very beautiful talk. A lot of things came up for me. I have a short question, but just a couple comments. you're discussing, something to the effect there is only God. In Ramana, there was one thing that Ramana said in Vicāra Saṅgraham, where somebody asks him the proper energy centers to meditate on. And he said they're products of imagination. Then he went on to say, I'm condensing this, all the names of gods are products of imagination. And then he said, if we who are endowed with various thoughts meditate on God that is the self, we would get rid of the plurality of thoughts by that one thought. And then even that one thought would vanish. He kind of is saying that. And he said, this is what is meant by saying that knowing oneself is knowing God. This knowledge is release. And there's a famous Sufi, he wrote this thing, The One Alone, his name is Ibn al-Arabi. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read outside of Ramana, where he says many things, but he said there are no relationships with God or within God. There is only God.
Yes.
Yeah, he was alluding to, like what you were saying. But my more specific question, I live on the Pacific Coast. I was here in the United States. I was up late and I was kind of sleepy when you first started talking, but I thought I heard you say something about to negate the existence of something presumes to a certain degree its existence. And you alluded to a verse that Rama, did I mishear you? Or this is?
I don't remember saying that exactly.
Oh, no, that wasn't an exact quote. It was something to that.
That is what Bhagavan said.
Yeah.
Whatever exists at one time, but not at another time, doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist.
Okay.
In other words, what exists must always exist. Something that appears to exist at one time, but not at another time, doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. So I then went on to explain that, how whatever appears and disappears, all phenomena, they appear and disappear. But to whom do they appear and disappear? It's only to ourself as ego. Only when we rise as ego are we aware of phenomena. So phenomena depend for their semi-existence upon the semi-existence of ourself as ego. And ego, our existence as ego depends upon our real existence, which is just sat-cit. That is, ego is a mixture. We can say it's a mixed awareness. It's a conflation of the pure awareness I am, that I am means our fundamental awareness of our own existence, that we have conflated with a body, and we are aware of ourselves as I am this body. So ego is that which is aware of itself as I am this body. So in ego, there is a real element, which is I am, and a false element, namely the body. So the ego borrows its semi-existence from the real existence I am. Just like a snake borrows its existence, that is an illusory snake, not a real snake, an illusory snake borrows its existence from a rope.
Okay.
So the relationship, you were talking about the relationship between us and God, the relationship between us and God, or between us and our real nature, is like the relationship, I'm talking metaphorically here, the relationship between the snake and the rope. What is the relationship between the snake and the rope? There is no snake, there is only a rope. What seems to be a snake is only a rope. So how can there be a relationship between one thing? What is your relationship with yourself? You want to express, what is my relationship with myself? As Bhagavan expressed it beautifully, I am only I.
Yeah, okay. Maybe that's how I inferred what I inferred, because it was sort of like, but thank you.
And one other thing about, because you referred to Vicāra Saṅgraham,
Yeah.
There are some nice ideas in Vicāra Saṅgraham, which are the pure teachings of Bhagavan. But a lot of Vicāra Saṅgraham is not actually Bhagavan's teachings. How that work came into existence, Gambhiram Seshya had been reading books on Vedanta, mainly on Vedanta and yoga and other things. Mainly he had read Vivekananda's 4 yogas, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raj Yoga, and Karma Yoga. I think there are 4 books that Vivekananda had written. He had read those books, and he had read some other books, mostly in English. He wasn't able to understand those, so he brought them to Bhagavan. He asked Bhagavan to explain to him. So there are many passages in Vicāra Saṅgraham where Bhagavan is just summarizing what is said in those books.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't take everything that is in Vicāra Saṅgraham as Bhagavan's real teachings.
Yeah, that's good to know.
But there are some very, very useful things in Vicāra Saṅgraham which we don't find anywhere else. So because Bhagavan, first he explained what Vivekananda or whoever the authors of the book, what they had written. And then he explained in more depth. So he gave his own commentary on that. So we need to, unfortunately in English, Arthur Osborne put Vicāra Saṅgraham as the first work in collected works, whereas in Tamil it's right at the end of in Bhagavan Tamil collected works it comes right at the end. He put it at the beginning. It's not a good work to start with. It may for people who are familiar with Vivekananda and with the more traditional Advaita, it may, and with yoga and other ideas, they may seem to feel themselves on familiar territory with Vicāra Saṅgraham, but it's not the pure teachings of Bhagavan. There are pure teachings of Bhagavan contained in it, but most of it is just Bhagavan summarizing and explaining what was said in those English books.
Well, that's good to know.
That's why there's all this mention about the not only about the yoga, but also about the 8-limbed jnana, where the practices of yoga are taken as metaphors for the practice of jnana. So there's a jumble of assorted ideas from various sources, but find their place there. They're not all Bhagavan's original teachings.
Well, that's good to know, because in that same verse, he dismisses practices. Presumably Ramana, it was quoted as Ramana. He was saying the tendency to want to meditate on chakras are for beginners in yoga.
Yeah. But that is definitely, Bhagavan made that very, very clear.
Yeah.
But Bhagavan wasn't against all these things. Why are so many different practices? Why are there so many different religions? Why within religions there are so many different practices? I mean, particularly within the vast family of religions called Hinduism, there is so many different philosophies, so many different practices. You can take your pick. You can be an atheist and a Hindu, because many Hindu forms of philosophy are not necessarily theistic. You can't say they are not atheistic as such. They're non-theistic, like Buddhism. Buddhism is non-theistic. Jainism is non-theistic. Many Hindu systems of philosophy are non-theistic. So I just say that as an example. There's a huge range of philosophies and beliefs and practices within Hinduism, so you can take your pick. So why is all this diversity? Why are all these different philosophies, all these different practices taught? To suit different people at different stages of their spiritual development. Some people are more drawn to like the Buddhist practices of vipassana or yoga practices, where you've got specified eightfold limbs of yoga. You've got to do this practice, this practice, this practice in this order. It's very much about doing, and if you do this, you'll get such and such an experience. This is suitable for certain people at a certain stage of their spiritual development. A lot of Buddhist practices are somewhat akin to yoga practices. So very different. Another choice is some people are more drawn to devotion. They're more of a devote. So there's very, very rich bhakti tradition, not one bhakti tradition, many bhakti traditions in India. There are the Vaishnava bhakti tradition, the Shaiva bhakti tradition, Shakta bhakti traditions. There's even Tantra and all their weird and wonderful things that they do. And so these all to suit different people at different stages of their spiritual development. So Bhagavan never condemned any practice. He didn't say this practice is wrong, but he always tried to push us further. And Bhagavan, for example, in Upadēśa Undiyār, where he summarizes all the other paths, he begins, the starting point is, if he condemns anything, he condemns kamya practices, that is doing something for the attainment of a selfish end. Yeah. So that he criticizes in the first two verses of Upadēśa Undiyār. Then he goes on to begin from nishkamya puja. Nishkamya means, nishkamya bhakti, the devotion to God for the love of God himself, not for what you can get from God. If you go to church or a mosque or a synagogue or a temple to ask God for this or that, what are you devoted to? You're not devoted to God. God is a means to an end. So the spiritual path begins from nishkamya. That is the nishkamya bhakti is the beginning of the spiritual path.
Well, the thing that first drew me to, I will cut off after this. I'm sure others have questions, but the thing that first drew me to Ramana, there was one quote that I heard. He says, there's all these paths to get, he said, there's all these paths, I'm paraphrasing it, that you should do something to get somewhere. Wouldn't it behoove you to know who you are before you undertake anything? And when I heard that quote, I said,
Bhagavan often said that. For example, once when some villagers came to Bhagavan and they were asking some questions, and Bhagavan, as always, he will first try to direct people to knowing what they actually are.
Yeah.
So he was in some way, but appropriate to their understanding. He was explaining this the need for one to know oneself, and the means to know oneself is to investigate oneself by turning within. I don't know exactly what he was saying to those villagers, but he said something to that effect. Kavya Ganapati Sastri, he was there at the time when Bhagavan. After those villagers had left, Bhagavan went out for a walk on the hill to answer call of nature and whatever, and to stretch his leg. Kavya Ganta then turned to the people who were there in the hall and said, see, this path of jnana, this path of self-inquiry, it is so difficult, even for very educated people like me, very learned people like me. And Bhagavan teaches it to these illiterate villagers. How can they possibly understand this? It would be much more appropriate if he were to direct them to me. I could give them some mantra diksha and they could do mantra japa. This would be much more suited to them. He commented. Yeah. When Bhagavan came back, someone told Bhagavan what Kavya Ganta had said. And Bhagavan said, what to do? This is all I know. But then Bhagavan added, what is ultimately, whatever other path you follow, you ultimately have to come to know yourself. There's no other way. That is, all other paths only lead to this. So why to teach this puja or japa or dhyana or this yoga or anything? You would teach it, and if you teach it, sooner or later people will come and say, I've done all this, but I still haven't got what I'm looking for. And then you have to say, no, that's not sufficient. You have to do something else. Why to teach something at first and later say that it's not sufficient? Why not teach the final thing first? If people, obviously Bhagavan didn't explain all this on this occasion, but on other occasions Bhagavan said it's better to first to teach the highest truth. If people are then not are unwilling or unable to grasp that, then you come down. But don't start from a lower level. Don't presuppose that the people are not going to grasp. First, you give the purest, the highest, or you can call it highest teaching or the deepest teaching, whichever way you want to refer to it. It means the same. First, you give the deepest teaching. If people are not willing to grasp that, then you can dilute it and modify it to suit them. So Bhagavan always started. That is Bhagavan. If you read books like Talks and Maharshi's Gospel and Day by Day and these things, when Bhagavan answers questions, he first tries to push people into recognizing the need for us to know what we actually are. And to know what we actually are, we need to investigate what we actually are. First, he pushes them in that direction. If they were not willing to grasp that, then he would come down to whatever level was suited to them. Yeah. But Bhagavan would always give people a chance by first giving because you're cheating people. If you first give them a diluted teaching, you're cheat. Why not give them the real thing? If they're not ready to accept the real thing, then you can dilute it in a way suited to their capacity. Yeah. At least offer them the real thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, all thanks to Bhagavan. I'm just talking about what Bhagavan taught us.
Thank you.
And that is the same approach which Sri Krishna took in Bhagavad Gītā. He blasted the whole truth in chapter 2, and then he step by step comes down.
The highest truth is what he taught in right from about verse 11 or so of chapter 2.
Exactly.
The rest of chapter 2, that is the purest Advaita. That verse that I referred to, where Bhagavan has translated into Tamil, one of the verses Bhagavan has translated into Tamil, in which Krishna says, that which does not exist, there is no existence for that which does not exist. There's no non-existence for that does not exist. That is the very purest Advaita teaching, the very deepest Advaita teaching. He taught that right at the beginning. And then he showed the implication of that, and then he finished off the second chapter, which is all can be taken as a commentary on that one verse. Then when Arjuna started asking other questions, then he came down to suit the level. So in the Bhagavad Gītā, it's a wonderful text because it's got something for everyone. But if Bhagavan said the purest teaching is there in sometimes when people ask Bhagavan, which verse expresses the essence of Bhagavad Gītā, he would often refer to that verse. On some occasions, he would refer to other verses, but often that was a favorite verse of his, because that says it all. There's what exists alone exists. What doesn't always exist doesn't ever exist. It's all just an appearance.
Right.
And that, though that seems to be, people refer to that verse, that's very lofty philosophy, but it's not practical. It's actually, that verse is extremely practical, because what is the existence that Krishna is talking about there? What is it that actually exists? It is only ourself. So it's our own existence that we impose on other things. What actually exists is only ourself. So if we understand what Krishna is saying there, that should turn our attention back to ourselves. Because what is it that exists always without ever appearing or disappearing? It is only our fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am.
Yeah.
Which is what Bhagavan describes in great detail in this verse 28 that I've been talking about today.
Right.
So actually that verse, though it may seem superficially to be just some abstract philosophy, it actually has an extremely practical implication. It should be, if we understand it properly, it's turning our attention directly back towards ourselves. What is it that exists always? Only I am. So let's hold on to I am, because I am alone is what actually exists. Nothing else actually exists. Everything else is just an appearance.
Right. In the interest of time, I'll just read the remaining questions. So Rabi Day is asking, how is being attentively self-aware same as self-investigation? In other words, why would the act of being self-aware alone lead to liberation and knowledge of reality?
Okay, firstly, being self-aware is not an action. Awareness is our very nature. And the nature of awareness is to be aware of itself. So self-awareness is our very nature. We are always aware of ourselves as I am. So there's never a moment when we are not aware of ourselves as I am. However, though we are always aware of our own existence, we generally overlook our own existence because we are more interested in other things. So the whole problem lies is our interest in other things. Because of our interest in other things, we are attending to those other things. So long as we're attending to other things, we are nourishing and sustaining our existence as ego. Because to whom do other things appear? Only to ego. So long as we are looking at anything other than ourselves, we are ego. So the only way to get rid of ego is to look at ourselves. In other words, attend to ourselves. But ourself is not an object. We are not, when we talk about attending to ourselves, it can easily be mistaken to be, oh, I need to look for, where is this eye? People say, I looked for this eye, but I couldn't find the eye. That shows a fundamental misunderstanding, because the eye that says, I looked for eye and I couldn't find eye, is the eye we are looking for. It's nothing but attending to ourselves. But since ourself is not an object, sometimes when we are to clarify what is meant by self-attentiveness, we can explain it as saying, being being attentively self-aware. We are always self-aware. There is never a moment when we are not aware I am, but because of our interest in other things, we are generally neglecting this and attending to other things. Instead of neglecting this, let us take interest in knowing who am I. In other words, let us take interest in just being self-attentive or being attentively self-aware. So being attentively self-aware, that itself is investigation, self-investigation.
Right.
What we can say the same thing in another way. What we actually are is being. So how can we investigate our own being? We can investigate our own being just by being. That's why this practice of self-investigation, sometimes it's said, attend to yourself, be self-attentive. The same thing is said in other words as just be. Because how can we attend to our being except by just being our being? Just being what we actually are is itself attending to ourselves. And attending to ourselves is being what we actually are. Because being and awareness are one and the same. So we cannot be as we actually are without being self-attentive, without being attentively self-aware. So long as we're aware of something else, we rise as ego. We cease to just be. We become arising. Instead of being the being I, we become the arising I. Or we seem to become the arising I. Of course, we never become anything. We always are as we are. But we seem to become this rising I.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
The next question is from Deepthi. She asks, I can somewhat understand the aṉanta and akhaṇḍa, but not so clear on the aṇanda aspect, I think. And happiness seems to be a state of mind.
Sorry, is the question about aṇanta or aṇanda?
That's what's not clear. Deepthi, it's not. I think it is a typo there. Could you go ahead and clarify that?
Yes, sure. Namaskaram, everyone. I wanted to not the aṇanda, the happiness aspect of it, because the aṇanta, akhaṇḍa, aṇanta, I mean, whatever I can grasp, I think I kind of understand. But the happiness seems to be a state of mind to me at this stage. Is awareness happy in knowing itself?
Happiness is not a state of mind. Happiness is the absence of mind. Would you call sleep a state of mind? Sleep is, though sleep is described as manolaya, we shouldn't take it to mean that it's a state of mind. It's the manolayam is dissolution of mind. There's no mind in sleep. When the mind is absent, that's why Bhagavan says in the first paragraph the first sentence of the first paragraph that I read, Bhagavan says, manamatra nidrayal, in sleep which is devoid of mind. Manamatra nidrayal dinamanubhavikam tansabhavamana achukate adeya. To attain that happiness, which is one's own real nature, which one experiences daily in sleep, which is devoid of mind. So happiness is not, the mind is the obstacle to happiness. As he says in the 14th, at the end of the 14th paragraph, he says, Jagamembadu Nineve. The world is nothing but thoughts. Jagam Mariam Podu, Adavju Ninevatra Podu, when the world disappears, in other words, when thought ceases, manam aṉanta te anubhavikam. Though he says mind here, it's not literally the mind that enjoys happiness, it is our own, we ourselves enjoy happiness. And because the nature of the mind is only thought, when thoughts are absent, mind is absent. So what he's referring to here as mind is ourself. He's not, we shouldn't take mind here literally, but it's the mind that experiences that. So to the extent that thoughts are removed, and therefore to the extent the world disappears, to that extent do we experience happiness. Jagam tondram podu, when the world appears, adu dukkate anu bhavikindradu. So only when the world disappears do we actually experience real happiness. When does the world disappear? Only when thoughts disappear. When does thought disappear? Only in sleep. So in the state devoid of mind, that is the state of happiness. So mind is the obstacle. When we rise as mind or ego, we see the world and we experience misery. When ego dissolves back into its source and remains as it actually is, as mere being, that is the state of happiness. So happiness is itself being. Being is happiness. Pure being is pure happiness. Pure awareness is pure happiness.
Right. It's yes, being and awareness, I think I understand, but like the happiness, it always seems to be there has to be something there to be happy.
Right, right. But are you not happy in sleep?
See, Michael, I don't know, because only after the fact of waking up do I know whether I slept well or not, right? But in sleep itself, I don't have an experience.
Yes, you do. Are you not aware that you were in a state in which you were not aware of anything? If there was no experience of sleep, you would, supposing, I mean, this is people generally, people who haven't thought about these things deeply, or who haven't practiced self-investigation, it becomes clearer. The deeper we go in this practice of self-investigation, the clearer this becomes. But even before we begin to practice self-investigation, we can understand it at the level of the intellect. If supposing sleep were a state in which there were absolutely no awareness, we would not be aware of any gap between successive states of waking and dream. All we would be aware of is waking and dream without any gaps.
Yes,
but we are aware of a third state in which there are no dreams, no world, nothing. There's just we alone are there. We're not aware of anything. We are just aware. So since we're aware of having been in that state, we must have been aware in that state. And while we were in that state, there was no misery. We are all very happy to sleep. If you're really tired, there's nothing you like more than to sleep. If supposing you've not eaten all day, but you've been working really hard and you're tired, you can be so tired that you don't even have the inclination to eat.
Sure.
Though you haven't eaten anything, the sleep takes priority.
Yes.
But there's nothing everyone loves to sleep. But because of our interest in the world, we rise up and we engage. But sooner or later, however interesting the world may be, however much we're enjoying our life in this, or seem to be enjoying our life in this world, a time comes when we all just want to subside back into sleep and just be peaceful and happy.
No, absolutely, Michael. No, I understand. I'm not denying the awareness of that there, of course, is awareness in sleep. But what I'm trying to understand is, but there's no misery, but at the same token, there's no happiness either. Then
why do you want to sleep? The very fact that you have a liking to sleep, as Bhagavan says, sukhame kar priyataku sukhame karanamadalam, since happiness alone is the cause of love. So whatever you like it because it makes you happy. There's nothing we like more than to sleep well.
Okay.
Because we're happy in sleep.
Yes, that's what. Yes, I understand.
We take so much trouble. So we buy expensive beds. We like to have nice pillows. We like everything. And if we're in a cold climate, we like to have nice covering, nice duvet or blankets or something. We take so much trouble to be comfortable in our sleep. But when we're sleeping, we don't know any of these things. Why do we take so much trouble to have a comfortable bed and everything? It is because we don't want our sleep to be disturbed. We enjoy an undisturbed sleep. If you're sleeping in an uncomfortable place, you sometimes wake up and you've got if you're for example, if you're just sleeping on the hard floor without a pillow or anything, you have to put your arm under your head. If you're tired, you'll sleep even in such circumstances. But when you wake up, you may be woken up after some time because your arm has become numb and stiff. So you turn over and you try to find a comfortable position to lie in. So we're all looking. We all want a sleep that is undisturbed. Why? Because we're very happy in sleep.
Yes, I think that's what I'm trying.
Sometimes we say, "Oh, I didn't sleep well last night. The whole night I seemed to be dreaming. My sleep was disturbed by so many dreams." That is when we're dreaming. Sometimes we enjoy the dream, but if the dream is disturbing our sleep, we don't like anything. If we are sleeping well in the middle of the night, if someone comes and wakes us up, if our phone rings in the middle of the night, well, naturally, we may not express it outwardly, but we may feel inwardly a little bit annoyed. Oh, why did this person call me at such an unearthly hour?
Yeah, Michael, I think it's because, yes, for me, it's clear that I'm aware in sleep and I exist in sleep, but that happiness aspect, I guess I get to, come into.
Is it clear to you that you like to sleep?
Yes, but I'm not sure. Yes, because like you said, I'm tired, or because I do like to sleep. Yes.
And are you peaceful in sleep?
I assume that. See, I don't know my state of sleep.
How can you doubt that is sleep is the most peaceful state. It's the only state where we're not troubled by thoughts, troubled by anything. It's a perfectly peaceful state.
Yes, dear Michael, I understand. But what I don't understand is I only know that I'm peaceful when I wake up from sleep. That, I was happy, or I was peaceful.
That is, you give it a label. You attach a label to it. Oh, sleep is a peaceful state only when you wake up. But when you were sleeping, you didn't need to give it any label. You were experiencing the peace directly.
Yes.
It's the labels, the mental labels, the verbal labels that we give. But we were experiencing that peace. We were experiencing that happiness in sleep.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you.
With that, so I have 3 more questions.
Okay.
And Ram, hey, I posted it. Can you just go ahead and say your question?
Yes, Michael, the direct question I have for you is, if you don't mind, have you been successful to be in a state where there are no thoughts or you're detached from thoughts?
No problem. Easiest thing. Every night I go into a state where I'm devoid of thoughts. Sleep is a state
So so you are able to experience that state where there are no thoughts, or you're detached from thoughts.
We all experience that state. Who has not slept?
Barring the sleep for a second, during the waking state, are you able to experience it?
Who are you asking? You're asking this person, Michael, and the one to whom you're asking, that is the person is Jada. You're asking the ego in that person. Have you experienced that? Ego is itself a thought. People say, I meditated for 20 minutes. I experienced a state with no thought. The I that says I experienced that is itself a thought, but 20 minutes, the duration, the time is thought. I sat in meditation, the sitting is thought. It's all thought. Being devoid of thought means being devoid of ego. We are devoid of ego only in two states, either in manolaya or manonasa. If we have experienced manonasa, that's the end of it. Finished. No coming back. From manolaya, we come back. So whatever state it may be, whether we call it sleep, or we call it coma, or we call it anesthesia, or we call it swoon, or we call it nirvikalpa samadhi, they're all just states of manolaya. Why? They are manolaya because that is the root of the mind is the first thought I, in other words, ego. Only in the state where ego has subsided does everything else subside. So the state of manolaya means the state in which ego has temporarily dissolved back into its source. That is the only state that is free of thought. Other than our own real state, which is what is called manonasa, the destruction. That is a state from which we never come back again. That is the permanent dissolution of mind.
So
I could tell you, I practiced pranayama, I've done this and that. I'm able to remain in nirvikalpa samadhi for hours together, or days together, or months together, or years together. It is possible. There are people who remain in nirvikalpa samadhi. Bhagavan used to tell the story of a yogi who remained for 300 years in nirvikalpa samadhi. But when he woke up, the first thought that came to his mind is, he angrily asked, where's my water? Because he had asked for water just before going into nirvikalpa samadhi. So Bhagavan said, even the most superficial thought is not destroyed by nirvikalpa samadhi. So our aim is not to be in nirvikalpa samadhi. It is only in the waking and dream state. It's only in the state where ego is active, but we can weaken and destroy the Vishaya vasanas, because Vishaya vasanas are ego's inclinations. In manolaya, whether it's sleep or nirvikalpa samadhi or general anesthesia or coma or whatever it may be, the difference between all those various states of manolaya is how we go into it. The actual state of manolaya is exactly the same. There's no difference between nirvikalpa samadhi and sleep or anesthesia or coma. They're all exactly the same state, because all differences exist only in the mind. In the absence of mind, in the state where the mind is dissolved, there are no differences. So, but since the ego is absent in sleep, its vasanas are also absent there, because whose vasanas are they? They're ego's vasanas. So sleep is a state devoid of vasanas. We cannot weaken or destroy the vasanas so long as we're sleeping or in nirvikalpa samadhi. It is only in the waking and dream state that we can weaken Vishaya vasanas. How do we weaken Vishaya vasanas? We need to understand what vasanas are. Vasanas are our inclination. Vishaya vasanas are our inclination to experience or be aware of or to attend to things other than ourselves, Vishayas. So long as we allow ourselves to be swayed by our Vishaya vasanas, we attend to things other than ourselves. So long as we are being swayed by the Vishaya vasana, we are thereby nourishing that vasana, if we want to put an end to if we want to weaken the vasana and eventually destroy it, we need to refrain from being swayed by it. The more we refrain from being swayed by our vasana, the weaker it becomes. The more we allow ourselves to be swayed by our vasana, the stronger it becomes. We can see that simply. Supposing you've got an obsessive thought, supposing some people have certain phobias. They've got dirt phobia or phobia of spiders or something, or they're afraid of the dark or whatever it may be, or agoraphobia. There's so many different types of phobia. Someone who has a phobia, the more they dwell on what they're afraid of, the bigger that phobia becomes. The way to overcome a phobia is just not to think about it, not to give attention to it, not to allow your mind to dwell on that fear. So like that with all vasanas, we strengthen a vasana by allowing ourselves to be swayed by it. We weaken it by not allowing ourselves to be swayed by it. The most effective way to avoid being swayed by any Vishaya vasanas is to cling to that which is not a Vishaya. In other words, only I. We cling to ourselves. When we hold on to self-attentiveness, we are thereby not allowing ourselves to be swayed by our vasanas. So the more we hold on to self-attentiveness, the more the Vishaya vasanas are weakened, and the sat vasana, the inclination just to hold on to I am, to know and to be what we actually are, that is strengthened. So it's only in waki and dream that we can weaken these vasanas. That's why Bhagavan didn't ask us to try to be thoughtless. In fact, to try to be free of thought. In fact, in Nana, in the 6th paragraph, he says, however many thoughts arise, so what? Big deal. What does it matter? What does it matter? Well, however many thoughts arise, as and when each thought arises, if one vigilantly investigates to whom has this thought arisen, it will be clear to me. By thus investigating who am I, the mind will return to its birthplace, and that means its source, and the thought that has risen will subside. Why will the thought subside? Because thoughts can arise only if we attend to them. No thought can exist without our attention. Thoughts exist because we're attending to them. So if we turn our attention away from the thought back towards ourselves, to the one to whom the thought has appeared, we are thereby depriving the thought of our attention. The thought will subside, the vasana that gave rise to that thought will be weakened, and we return to our birthplace. So it is only in the waking and dream state, in the state of mental activity, that we can weaken vasanas and eventually eradicate all of them. So our aim is not to be free of thoughts. Our aim is to be free of the first thought, and we cannot be free of the first thought, not to be free of the first thought temporarily, because temporarily we're free of it every night when we go to sleep. We want to be permanently free of it. What is this first thought? It is ego, the false awareness, I am this body. Because ego is a false awareness of ourself, it can be destroyed only by correct awareness of ourself. So we need to investigate ourselves. So our aim isn't to be free of thoughts. Our aim is to know to whom do thoughts appear. To me, who am I? To know who we actually are. So the thoughts, we shouldn't mind thoughts. We should be very grateful when thoughts appear. Okay, this thought has appeared. Why has it appeared? To remind me to attend to myself. Because this thought cannot have appeared without me. It's only in my view that the thought has appeared. So to whom has this thought appeared? We turn our attention back to ourselves. So in self-investigation, we are not trying to be free of thoughts. We are trying to be self-attentive. Freedom from thoughts, or the reduction of the thought, the subsidence of thought, is a byproduct, but it's not our aim. In yoga, the aim is to be free of thoughts. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. But Bhagavan says, what is the use of being free of thought? We are free of thoughts every night when we fall asleep. If you go down that path of trying to control the chitta vrittis, you end up in nirvikalpa samadhi, which is a state just like sleep. What's the benefit? Bhagavan said, before subside, if you want to use pranayama to reduce the intensity of mental activity, by all means do so up to a certain point. But before you subside in Manalaya, you need to make use of that relative quiescence of mind by turning the mind back within to know who am I. That's what Bhagavan implies in verse 14 of Upadēśa Undiyār, when he says, if one sends the mind, which is the nature of the mind is to subside by controlling the breath. That mind which has partially subsided, he doesn't say partially, but implies that the mind which has partially subsided by control of the breath, if you send that mind on the orvari, the path of investigation, its form will die. So we are not seeking chittavritti nirodha. We are seeking to know what we actually are. The result of knowing what we actually are is the eradication of the first of all vrittis, the aham vritti, for false awareness, I am this body. When that is eradicated, all thoughts are eradicated permanently. So we're not looking for a temporary cessation of thought. We are looking to know ourselves so that thought may cease permanently. But if we take the cessation of thoughts as our aim, we end up in nirvikalpa samadhi, which leads us nowhere.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Srikant says he's got answer to his, he got the answer to his question, so I'll just go on to Shohan. You wanted to say something? Please go ahead.
Yes, Michael, I wanted to say that when I was listening to your session today, including the question answers, I just thought of one sentence. It came to me, and that was, "Oh my God." That should be the title of this video. It's "Oh my God."
That is Bhagavan's teachings. If we really understand Bhagavan's teachings, oh my God, he's stopping us in our tracks. That is the nature of the mind, is to be rushing outwards so enthusiastically. But when Bhagavan appears, and when we understand his teachings, it's, oh my God, what am I doing rushing out? Let me go back within. And where can we find that God that we say, oh my God? We can find it only within ourselves.
Wow. Also, just very quickly, also what came to my mind was there is a very good correlation to what you were saying, to maybe the if we talk about the set of all numbers, for example, and then think about the relationship between the numbers, just put them in a line.
Yes.
So 1 is less than 2, so it comes before 2, etc.
Yeah.
And then -1 comes before 0. So if we just think about that relationship, I found many correlations to what you were talking about. And what you were talking about, the existence itself. So the numbers have a property that makes them the number. And so existence has that that you were talking about, that property of existence that makes it existence, right?
Yes.
Same, you talk about consciousness, that property of consciousness that makes it consciousness.
Yes.
And same, you talked about happiness.
Yes.
So it was amazing.
Yeah.
For one thing.
We can loosely refer to these things, existence and consciousness and happiness. We can loosely refer to them as properties because they seem to us to be properties. For instance, we see things that come into existence and cease to exist. So they gain the property of existence, they lose the property of existence. But actually, what Bhagavan is pointing out here in this verse, sat-cit-ānanda, is not a property. That is, existence and awareness, they are too basic to be a property. That is, in order to have any property, a thing must exist. But existence itself has no property. Even that is, existence is its very nature. Even to call it a property we can't even call it a property. Likewise, awareness. Awareness is aware. Awareness is not just a property of what is aware. It is the very nature of what is aware. So awareness and existence, they are too fundamental to be called properties. They seem to be properties. But for example, the mind seems to have the property of awareness, but actually that awareness is the reality underlying the mind. There can be no mind without awareness, but there can be awareness without the mind. So awareness in its pure form is not a property. Existence in its pure form is not a property. Likewise with happiness. Happiness in its pure form, it's our real nature. It's what we actually are. It's our very being is happiness. So it's not a property.
Yeah, this is even taking it a next level deeper.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying, but of course, we are trying to comprehend these things with our intellect. There's a limit to how far our intellect can go. But
I get it. Like
truly understand this, we need to turn within and lose ourselves in this sat-cit-ānanda. Then only we can truly say we've understood sat-cit-ānanda. Except there's no one left to except sat-cit-ānanda to understand sat-cit-ānanda.
Yeah, I was saying, Michael, that like there is actually an infinite numbers between 0 and 1 itself. So we can take it as 0 as an example and think of it as an, like you were talking about, intransitive relationship.
Yes.
So that was really something.
Yeah. I mean, things like numbers or all these things, we can use these as analogies, but the reality, the analogies just help us to get some sort of grasp on the concepts. But actually, the reality is beyond all concepts. It's anivachaniya. It's inexpressible. It cannot be grasped by the mind, or it cannot be grasped by speech. So, but it's important to understand these concepts as well as we can understand it at the mental level, because that's pointing us in the right direction. But to really, to know sat-cit-ānanda, sat-cit-ānanda is not a mere concept, it's not a mere word. It's our own reality, and we can know it only by being it. taṇādiyal. No, being oneself alone is knowing oneself. So to know sat-cit-ānanda, we have to be sat-cit-ānanda. And we can be sat-cit-ānanda only by turning within and drowning in that, losing ourselves in that, surrendering to that completely.
So if I can use this last example, is if I can say that sleep is like a 0 state of mind, and the very fact that I'm not complaining about sleep, that means that all the numbers must be good. So 0 is good because I'm not complaining about it. So that means the very nature of 0 is good.
Yes, yes. Except 0 means sunya. Bhagavan says sat-cit-ānanda is not sunya, it's purna, it's fullness, it's wholeness. So even that is, again, you're using numbers as analogies. It's okay up to a certain point, but no analogy we should take too far.
Okay.
Yeah. That state, as Bhagavan said in the previous verse 27, that awareness that is devoid of awareness and ignorance is awareness. What does he mean by that? That awareness that is devoid of awareness or knowing of anything other than itself, or not knowing anything other than itself, that alone is real awareness. So what Bhagavan is teaching us is something very, very deep. Okay, it's okay to use analogies because analogies can help us to understand these things, but we shouldn't. Every analogy has its limitations. No analogy can analogies are just aids to understanding. But
starting point.
We have to go beyond all analogies. We have to go back to the very source of the mind for whom analogies are useful.
Thank you, Michael.
Right.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Well, thank you for talking about sat-cit-ānanda today. My question is, where does this compound word sat-cit-ānanda originate? Is it a creation of the Vedanta scholar to describe the nature of Brahman according to Vedanta?
Yes, I don't know what is the earliest text in which this term, possibly sat-cit, the compound term sat-cit possibly predated sat-cit-ānanda, I don't know. But we're not really interested in the history of these things. It is, these are useful descriptions, but they are only descriptions. What sat-cit-ānanda is cannot be grasped by our mind. So these words are pointers. All words can only be pointers. They can never capture that at which they're pointing. So what are they? What is sat-cit-ānanda? Tattvamasi, you are that. So if you want to know sat-cit-ānanda, you have to know yourself. How to know yourself? You need to stop looking at other things, look within. If you look within and know what your real nature is, then, as Bhagavan says in this verse, then aṇādi, aṉanta, akhaṇḍa, sat-cit-ānanda. So these words are all indicators, they're all pointers, but you can't, Brahman cannot be caught in words. What we actually are cannot be, it can be indicated by words, but it cannot be captured by words. Likewise, the mind cannot grasp it because it's beyond thought, it's beyond words, but it is ourself. So to know it, all we need to do is to know what we actually are. That's why Bhagavan begins this word, taṇādu yādu terihil. If one knows what is the real nature of oneself, then aṇādi, aṉanta, akhaṇḍa, sat-cit-ānanda. So to understand this verse perfectly, we need to know what we actually are. This verse is a very useful pointer because it's pointing at what our real nature is and what actually exists, what really exists. This is a useful pointer, but we shouldn't continue holding on to the pointer. What is it pointing at? It's all pointing at us. All of Bhagavan's teachings, all of Advaita, if understood correctly, is pointing only at ourselves. That is why so much importance is attached to these Mahavakyas. And the Mahavakya that's talked about most of all is Tattvamasi. You yourself are that. The whole purpose of that is stop looking outside, see yourself.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
All thanks to Bhagavan.
So, Kumar, is there a way, you and Michael, I'm asking, is there a way we can have a sort of a line with Michael to ask any emergency questions within the month?
Yeah, you can send it to me and I can forward it to Michael.
Okay.
Or if you want to email me, on my website, there's my email address is there. You can email me, but I don't have much time for answering emails. So nowadays, I've changed that contact me page, and I've asked people if they want to be sure of getting an answer or to be more likely to get an answer, if they use WhatsApp or Signal, if they give me their phone number, I can then reply by voice message on either WhatsApp or Signal. Nowadays, I generally spend I go for a walk every day, and I spend most of my walking time answering questions on by leaving voice messages on WhatsApp or Signal for people who've asked questions.
Oh my God, Michael, that's priceless.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, if there is a way we can get that number, that would be awesome.
I won't give my number. You have to give your number first. I'm I'm a very calculative businessman. The reason being, if I give my number, people will be calling me at all hours of the day and night. I've had some people in the middle of the night, I get a call from, because people don't think about differences of time zone and so on. And also I get calls in the middle of, so what I request people is, if they want to talk to me, first they can email me, give me their phone number. I will then send a WhatsApp message. I will reply to questions by voice message. If you want to talk, then please don't call me. Please tell me what is a convenient time for you, and I will try to call you at that time. Because otherwise, I'll be getting calls at all times of day and night.
Your time is very precious, so it's good to be a good businessman with your time. Precious.
Well, it's not my time; it's Bhagavan's time. So it's not. I mean,
right. I think
I like to spend my time talking about and thinking about Bhagavan's teaching. So when people ask me questions, I'm always happy to talk about Bhagavan's teaching, because it keeps on reminding me of what is the point of all this. It's turning within. So keeping our mind dwelling on Bhagavan's teaching will be constantly reminding us of the need to turn within. So it is beneficial in that sense. So my time is Bhagavan's time. How he wants me to use my time is how he wants his time to be used by, in my case, is entirely up to him. But I can answer many more questions by leaving voice messages than I can by typing emails. Emails, it takes much more time to reply in writing. And
so you don't feel that all of us are detracting from you going within, like all of us are not a distraction?
If you weren't distracting me, my vasanas would be distracting me. So it is not the world that distracts us. It's our inclination to attend to the world. If we have inclination to go within, no activity of mind, speech, or body will in any way obstruct our going within. Because as Bhagavan said, prarabdha affects only the outward term mind. So how do you, if you want to avoid experiencing your prarabdha, there's only one way, turn within. So the activities of the mind, speech, and body can go on in spite of our being turned within. If it's the destiny, the mind, speech, and body will be made to do those actions. So we shouldn't be thinking that the world is a distraction. Whenever the world appears, to whom has it appeared? We should turn our attention back within. So if I had so much love to attend to myself, I would be attending to myself even when the mind, speech, and body are replying to questions. Unfortunately, I have to confess, I don't yet have sufficient love, so my mind keeps on coming out. But keeping the mind dwelling on Bhagavan's teaching is a constant reminder of the need to turn within.
Awesome. We're very grateful for that, Michael.
Well, yes. all gratitude is only to Bhagavan. I mean, he is one who arranges things as they are. So things happen according to his will. That is, whatever we are destined to experience is the fruit of our past actions that have been selected and allotted by him. He has allotted, what he has allotted for us to experience in this lifetime is what is best for us. So all is his will. Bhagavan sometimes used to say, whether you call it God, whether you call it prarabdha or God's will, it's one and the same thing. So it's actually better, though we talk of prarabdha, it's better to think of, we should always think of prarabdha as being God's will. What God has allotted for me to experience in this lifetime for my own spiritual benefit. So all is his will, and everything is happening according to his will. We also have a will. We are also trying to intervene foolishly, but his will prevails. So the wise thing to do is to surrender our will to his will. Nyanishtam enishtam, your will is my will. Imbadaku, that is happiness for me. We need to give up all our own likes and dislikes and surrender our will completely to his will. Because until we are willing to surrender our will, how will we be willing to surrender ourselves? Ultimately, we need to surrender ourselves, but we cannot surrender ourselves without surrendering our will.
Hey, Michael, your background, it now tells me that that's like where the treasure was found, sort of.
Yes. What I'm saying, I can hide. I'm not necessary. Only Bhagavan and Aruṇacha are necessary, because whatever I'm saying comes only from Bhagavan. That is what I learned from Bhagavan. And where did Bhagavan learn it all? Only from Aruṇacha. But Aruṇacha speaks only in silence. We can't understand that silence. So it was necessary for Aruṇacha to take the human form of Bhagavan to appear and tell us all this in words that our dull heads can understand. So it all comes only from him. All clarity, all understanding, everything comes only from him. We ourselves come only from him. But the foolish thing is we should never have left him. So we need to go back the way we came, as he said. We need to subside back into our source. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya.